Can I ask you all to stand for prayers, please? Thank you. Creator and sustainer of all things and all people, you are the source of all wisdom and light. Enlighten our minds and receive your guidance, so that you may lead us into true wisdom. May all that we say and do in the service of this county, whether as elected councillors or as officers, be in accordance with your will and for the good of your people. Amen. Thank you. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, would everyone leave by one of the two exits at the rear of the council chamber? Officers will be on hand to assist any people with disabilities. May I also ask members who have mobile phones to make sure they are secure and switched off so that they will not disturb the meeting. Thank you. Agenda item 1. Chairman's announcements. Mr Tony Kershaw represented the Quorn and Barrow-upon-Soar electoral division from 2001 to 2017 and served as chairman of the County Council from 2008 to 2009. He spent 2 years as Cabinet Support Member before becoming a member of the Cabinet from 2005 to 2007. With lead member responsibilities for access to services, communication and consultation. He was a Cabinet member again from 2009 to 2011, where he was lead member for Waste. He was a Scrutiny Commissioner from 2011 to 13, where his role included chairing the Budget and Performance Monitoring Scrutiny Panel during 2013-14. He was chairman of the Environmental and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee from 2015 until 2017. He was chairman of the Corporate Governance Committee. Mr David Inman. Mr David Inman represented the Hinckley No. 3 Burbage electoral division from 1973 until 1977. He served on the Environmental Committee and the Public Protection Committee. I had the pleasure of sitting on the committees with Mr Inman as a borough councillor, who gave much dedication to his work and dedication to being a councillor. I invite the council to stand in a silent tribute to the memory of Mr Kershaw and Mr Inman. Thank you. Thank you very much, members. As members will be aware, Phil Crossland has recently retired from the County Council. Phil joined the County Council as Director of Environment and Transport in 2013 and has made enormous contribution to the operation of the Council. His customer-focused approach has put Leicestershire residents at the heart of how the department delivers its services. Most recently, Phil has been instrumental in representing Leicestershire within the Midlands Connect, placing Leicestershire firmly at the forefront of the development of major transport proposals in this area. I am sure that all members will recognise the excellent advice and support that Phil has provided over the last 4 years and will wish to join with me in wishing Phil a long and happy retirement. Visitors, I welcome you all to the meeting, and guests and members. and of course everyone who is joining us on webcast today. I want to make members aware that photographs will be taken of the meeting during the Chairman's announcements. These are stock images of council meetings for our communication item at Teams. Item 2, minutes. I move that the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Council held on the 28th of June 2017, of which have been circulated to members, be taken as read, confirmed and signed. I'll have a second, please.
Second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr O'Shea. Item number 3, minutes. I move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Council held on June the 28th, 2017, copies of which have been circulated to members, be taken as read, confirmed and signed. Second, please.
Second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr O'Shea. Item number 4, declarations of interest. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in the respect of items on the agenda meeting. I will take it as read that all members will wish to declare a personal interest in relation to the item on members' allowance. Are there any other further declarations? Mr Sheenan, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, yes, I've got a personal interest in item 9A by virtue of being a member of Unison and also a sponsored councillor. In the context of the debate, it is only a personal interest, so I'll declare that. But on item 9B, electrification of the Middle Main Line, because my house is in the rural support zone, I have a pecuniary interest, and I shall leave the room and not take part in that debate.
Thank you very much, Mr Sheenan. Item number 5, I have no notice of supplementary questions to the questions. Thank you. So we now come to the item to consider, item 7, to consider the reports of the Cabinet Scrutiny Commission and... Sorry.
Item 6, the position statement.
Oh, hang on. I think it's been clipped over. Can you just...
Page 20.
Yeah, those clipped them all together for me. I've got it here. Yeah. With the excitement of no supplementary questions, I've clipped the wrong page to... So, apologies. Agenda item number 6, to receive position statement from members of the Cabinet. Mr Rushton.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. As you can see, the position statement is relatively long, so for the sake of a quicker meeting, being as you've all read it, I won't read it through, just as I usually do, highlight a few items. Obviously, number 1, on fair funding. Again, just a warning in here that the MTFS projections are showing us that we might need to make a saving of 40 million, not 20 million. So as you look at the MTFS, things appear to be getting worse. On the second paragraph in there, I want to thank in particular Byron Rhodes, who's done massive amounts of work on this. Byron will speak for himself in a little while on the work he's done. But it's fair to say he's probably leading the debate on fair funding, certainly without exception among the county councils, but also now helping out the LGA in general, which is obviously a difficult brief because the LGA has 5 horses pulling it. They're not just counties, you've got districts, boroughs, Mets and all manner of things. But to be fair to Byron, he has done a lot of good work there. And while I'm here, also to thank, I always call him Young Tambini, but to thank Chris, the director, for his work, because he has been exceptional. And he's also ably backed up by Joe Miller, who works up in the Chiefs Department, who does all the research and stuff, because there's no point just coming up with figures if we can't justify them. On the Corporate Asset Investment Fund, the key to it is the second paragraph, where it says the strategy sets out the basis on which we propose to invest some of our capital resources and is aimed at generating long-term and relatively stable sources of income to offset the funding gap in the MTFS. And, of course, no borrowing, which is something we should be proud of. A lot of the councils are actually doing this with borrowing. Again, Byron leads on this, so good work with Byron. And he's ably assisted by Richard Blunt, who has particularly good knowledge of these sort of things. One that I just do want to spend a little bit of time on was obviously the visit by Mr. Zhu Hexin the other day. It was a real honour really for him to come to Leicestershire, because he could have come anywhere in the whole of the Midlands Engine region. And it's due to our good relationships which we've had with Szechuan, 30 years next year. And in his speech he did invite myself and Sir John to visit Szechuan next year. Whether or not I'll go, I don't know. It's a very long way for 3 days of talks. But if Midlands Engine do sponsor it, I think it's beholden of us to send someone, even if I don't go myself. He's a funny guy, because when he talks to you like I'm his political equal. And it's a compliment, really. But when he tells you that he represents 61 million people in Szechuan and another 30 million in Chengdu, it just puts into perspective the difference between myself, who was ostensibly representing the city and the county, because Peter was away at some city mayor's do somewhere. Just puts into perspective the difference in size and the difference in powers that he's got. And we're whittling on there about how we're going to build HS2 over the next 30 years or whatever. And he's saying, well, we're going to build the Belton Road in like 2. I mean, it's just a completely different system. But it's certainly very, very useful to be friends with him. It's useful for Chinese investment here, and it's useful for British investment in China. And Bob Allison was here from Loughborough University, and one of the things I didn't know, in the summer, Loughborough University obviously hosts conferences and things. And last year, over the summer, they hosted 300 Chinese referees, because obviously football, soccer in China is going up like this. So 300 Chinese referees came over here to be trained by Bob at Loughborough University, and then went back. And obviously when they go back, 300 people, probably 3,000 people. And it all adds to the sum of knowledge of Leicestershire and the good work we do. And they were very keen for Bob to go over there, because obviously they respect that Loughborough is a really good university. On the Midlands Engine and Midlands Connect, I'm very pleased the Engine has submitted its vision for growth to the Prime Minister's office, and rather than read everything here, I'll continue to work with partners, including the LEP, SPS in the city, and other counties and cities to promote it. Within the context provided by the regional work, I try and hold meetings with other people, because obviously we can't dictate anything as just one county. So I obviously see SPS a lot. I see the leader of Nottingham whenever I can, leaders of Staffordshire and Warwickshire. That's Phil Atkins and Izzy. And I do see Kay Cutts and Barry Lewis quite often through East Midlands Council and things, but I'm going to arrange formal meetings with them to make sure when we go to things like Connect and the Engine that we're all singing from the same song sheet. And interesting with Izzy the other week, myself and the chief went to see Izzy and her chief, and we're going to try and arrange a strategic meeting between Leicestershire, Warwickshire, Coventry and Leicester City, plus Warwick University and Loughborough University, because we must have things in common. I mean, we're only divided by the A5, and if you think we're the west of the East Midlands and she's the east of the West Midlands, it would be useful if when we go to these bigger meetings that we're singing from the same song sheet, Madam Chairman. A strategic growth plan, well, obviously you saw it this morning. There's some pretty big things in there. There was more questions than we certainly had time for. Interesting questions, especially with the A46 and some people going on about the A6 and things like that. But the policy of the government is we need to build more houses, and we should try and make sure we get the roads and the infrastructure to support those. And this is all part of that growth plan. If we don't build more houses, there's certain young people who will never, ever afford to buy a house. You know, we're supposed to be building 250,000 a year, and over the past 20-odd years, whatever, maximum we've built is 170,000. So as a country, we do need to up our game. Otherwise, as I say, some people will continue living in rented, and those that want to buy will never be able to afford it. I mean, if you look at the numbers, say where my son is down in university in London, the cheapest one-bedroom flat or even a studio in London, the cheapest you can get is 350,000. Now, that is not sustainable for people that are earning the average wage, say, between 20 and 30 grand a year. It's beholden on us to do something, and in my view, the strategic growth plan at least attempts to help us build more houses in strategic areas rather than swamping villages. You know, I represent villages, but that doesn't mean I don't think we should be building more and building them more quickly. Otherwise, young people will never, ever afford a house. On Loughborough University, they held their National School Games, which was, again, a great credit to Loughborough University. And as I constantly say, Loughborough University is my favourite university out of the three because it's the only one that's solely in Leicestershire. Loughborough's a great town, and to say they come 7th in the whole country in university student satisfaction is a credit to them down there, because obviously Loughborough's only in a town, whereas some of the others are in big cities. So I want to put on thanks, congratulations really to Bob and all the team down at Loughborough University for the good work they do. And while I'm here, to thank Ian Veers for all the work in making it possible for the cycle racing. I mean, I always watch the Tour de France and the Valletta, and it's really good that we can get those sort of things down in Loughborough. On historic child sex abuse, I won't go into detail because I know Ivan is going to be speaking to it in a little while. And also on Burkitt House Special School, Ivan will be speaking to that after I finish speaking. So on that, Chairman, I'll conclude and answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Rhodes, thank you. Mr. Old, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I just thank the leader for his very warm words about me personally? It's really not deserved, because I lead a team, and there's some very remarkable team, particularly in our finance department, and I could list a whole load of other names that could be added to them, and it is that team that Leicestershire puts together, and indeed spreading out into the other departments, which actually is our greatest strength. What I want to do for just a few moments is to add a little bit to the leader's statement. On the fair funding, we certainly face the challenges that he's outlined, in particular the further pressures due to the likelihood that the austerity programme might go forward even a further year beyond what we've presently planned for, which is why we're now talking about 40 million gap, which is unidentified. And that's going to be a considerable challenge to us if we have to eventually make that level of saving. We're already seeing elsewhere the pressures on those councils that were later than us in starting their cost reduction and transformation programmes, and the council not far from us, quite a large one, that's already declared that they can't meet their obligations by the end of this year. I fear there will be others as well. So clearly the whole thing is coming to a head. Right now, our fair funding proposals, known as the Leicestershire model, is effectively the only show in town which is a model which actually exemplifies what each council would get if the model was implemented. There are two alternatives, one which the Department for Communities and Local Government are putting together. That one has yet to see the light of day, but they are doing a lot of research to try to get an evidence base to support it, and it's likely to take some time before they'll have specific proposals. And there's a third one which has been developed by the Association of Local Authority Treasurers, which is actually very similar to ours but doesn't contain the adjustment factors because they don't feel they can put them forward. If you put in our adjustment factors, that's the balance between adult care, children's care and so on, and the area cost adjustment, those sort of things, you get very similar results. So we know we're on to something. No one's actually been able to knock us down completely. One gap, however, in our model, which I'm now asked the accountants and the treasurers and the finance department to take a look at, and they'll begin to work on it soon, is that we had not exemplified the district councils separately from the county council. So we're going to have a look to see if we can actually do that. And some districts have, in fact, complained about this around the country and say, well, it doesn't really cover the districts. Well, of course, we include them in these virtual unitary calculations. So we're going to see if we can pull the things out and do direct calculations for districts and for the counties without their districts and see how far we can get with that. At the Local Government Association, I've now been appointed to the Resources Board, which is quite an exciting committee. I went to my first meeting last... oh, yes, it is, yes. I went to my first meeting last Friday. It's only one of body which is looking at fair funding. There's a task and finish group, there's a leadership group of the LGA, and there's the management board as well. And the leader, of course, sits on the management board on behalf of the East Midlands, and he had a difference of opinion with the chairman of the Resources Board, who also sits on that board as the representative of London councils. And London councils, as you know, are much better funded than we are. So it's not surprising that he should have a difference of opinion with her. So the battle continues. We're being helped very much now by one of our MPs, who's arranging further meetings for us in Whitehall to discuss with officials the detail of our model. And certainly the DCLG are very clear that they are going to introduce a needs-based model. The question is when and what form it will take. And of course the line we're taking is the Leicestershire model would work, and they could do it in much shorter time frame than anything else which is around. So thank you very much for the chance to put that information before the Council.
Thank you. Mr Bolton, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank the leader for his statement. Pick up on a few of the items. It is disappointing when every year, this time of year, the financial gap appears to grow. And we were told a few months ago it was 20 million, and now, for the reasons that the leader has identified and the report we saw to the Cabinet, particularly the pressure on children's social care set to grow. And I think the other major item, we've got to find £5 million to deal with ash dieback. And on top of that now, saying that austerity is going to continue and therefore we're going to have to find more cuts. And you just wonder where the end of the tunnel is, where is the light? And I know that, as the Deputy Leader said, the hope is that we will achieve a change in the funding formula. And I think there was, over the summer, some publicity and campaign going on. The Deputy Leader was regularly appearing in the media, encouraging the public to get involved, which I think is a good thing, and certainly for people to understand the difficult situation the Council faces. But I think that he would acknowledge there has been a change. And that is before. The case was that you essentially wanted to take money from those better off areas, redistribute the formula, and we've always said that was very unlikely to be accepted by the Westminsters and the Kensington and Chelseas, and even, what's the one you always quote, Surrey, and that they would never ever allow that to happen in there. But you now have amended the position to say, well, what actually needs to happen is more money needs to be put into the system. That's as I understand the position. The only way we're going to get the formula is that when they come, hopefully, to devolve more business rates, instead of giving us a lot more responsibilities, that money that is then freed up should go in to fund services and deal with this distribution. As I understand, that's the position, but I'd be grateful for clarification. And then, within limited time, come to the growth plan. Now, I think Nick is being a bit hopeful on this one, that he just wants everyone to roll over and put this through, at least to go out to consultation. And perhaps this is what happens when a few people in a closed room, and planners in particular, get together and draw up a plan, which the majority of members, both here and in the district, have had little or no involvement in. We're just getting presentations from officers being told, one option, this is what we're going to do, and this is what, in due course, we want every council to agree to. And I think it is a very big ask. It's changing, particularly the way the distribution is done across the county and the city for 30 years. And it's predominantly because Leicester can no longer meet its needs. And what you're asking all the districts to do that haven't had the infrastructure, hasn't had the things that are in the city, you're asking them to take the overspill and the land is running out in the city and to deal with that. And that is a very big ask, Nick, to ask the districts to do it and to change and turn the whole thing. And there are some eye-watering housing figures in there. My own district, without making the case for any of it, with its allocation of the local plan it's consulting on now, the district would need to grow by twice. It would double in size to 2050. And you're asking this plan to predict what the housing needs are going to be in 2036. Well, who knows that? Who knows what the economy is going to be like? Who knows who's going to be in power? Who knows what the position is? So I feel we're being bounced into this, and I have to say I think a lot of members feel similar across the districts, and some more work needs to be done on it. And then finally, Chair, just talk about welfare reform. And yes, there is some useful work going on there on the back of the Bishop's Poverty Commission, and scrutiny is playing its role in that. And we held a very positive session a few weeks back when we actually got the people in that try and help people in poverty, some of the charity and the services, as well as talking to our officers. And one thing they all said was the problems associated with rolling out universal credit, going to full service. It's being rolled out in Leicestershire now, and that DWP really isn't ready for it. And if there was one message they wanted us to send to ministers and to DWP, then it was that we're not ready for universal credit, we need more time, and particularly the issue of rent being paid direct to landlords and people not being able to manage the money they've got. And we're going to carry on doing some work on this, I hope, and see how we can help. But I think it's not so much what we've got to do locally, we've got to get some changes to welfare reform nationally, and if we can play our part in that, we should do, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Galton. Dr Eynon, thank you.
Okay. No, thank you, Chair. Yes, I too would like to thank the leader for his report and also for his praise for Councillor Rhodes for the work that he's been doing on the fairer funding strategy. I always find it interesting that the principle of distribution behind this strategy is essentially to each according to his need. Reminds me awfully of a slogan made popular by Karl Marx back in 1875. And Byron and I actually sat next to each other, Chair, at the Local Government Association conference, and it was a delight to see him tackle what seemed to be a brick wall at that point. And it does feel like we are getting through that brick wall to a recognition that what matters is what services we need to provide for our communities, ultimately, not how much we can make. Which brings me to the next subject, which is, of course, the Corporate Asset Investment Fund strategy. And I understand we have to sweat our assets. I'm not entirely sure that all of the population will understand why we're buying properties in Lichfield and Tamworth to do so. And I do have some concerns from experiences in Colville, where we do have a lot of properties, that sometimes, by sweating our assets, we may actually be doing a disservice to the communities that we are supposed to be representing. I'm very grateful to hear that we are doing well with our relationships with China and, of course, our Loughborough University, where I was at one time a GP. It was great fun dealing with all their Chinese students, and even better if we are building on that relationship. But strategically, yes, I do have to agree with Councillor Galton. We do have a bit of a problem with some of the connectivity. And it's not just that the strategic growth plan is trying to sort out this connectivity. It is dealing with the southwest to northeast connectivity, but it still has there in the document that the problem is our east-west connectivity. HS2 isn't going to help. It just seems to be a funnel down to the southeast. We appear to have, in certainly my own area, a problem with strategic house building. The strategy seems to build them in one place, put the employment in another, and don't have any strategy for getting people from one place to the other. And I am concerned that, yes, I understand why we removed the highways forums, but I do think that we have a problem with connectivity with our own district councils and planning authorities, and that there are issues that I know are rumbling in my own patch, where information has not got through from highways, that it is going to enable the 4,500 houses that they need to build in one parish in my patch to happen. the leader seemed to miss mentioning in what is written in his report. He did write about welfare reform. I assume it's a Freudian slip that he forgot to mention it. And Councillor Galton is absolutely right. The Scrutiny Commission's poverty workshop was very useful, and it was interesting that it wasn't our side or his side, that members who actually said, perhaps universal credit is actually making the situation worse for the very poorest in our society. I do think that as a council we need to address that with those that perhaps were rolling it out with the best of possible intentions. At least some people believe that. So thank you very much, Chair, and thank the leader for his
Thank you,
excellent
Dr.
report.
Mr. Sheenan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of things. Good news on Burkitt House Special School. I certainly look forward to having the opportunity to visit that when they're all settled into the new building. But on the strategic growth plan, I think the leader said that the government is keen that infrastructure should go with new housing. I mean, is this a change of policy? And what does he say to those areas that have had the housing approved but are missing out on the infrastructure?
Thank you, Mr. Sheenan. Dr. Feltnam, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. But just picking up on the particular point about the Loughborough University and the school games. I would like to add my thanks to Ian Veers and his team because the public highways, the cycling races, took part in my patch, actually. And so there was considerable, slightly delicate negotiations with some of the farmers over the fact that it was mid-harvest. Obviously they needed to clear the roads completely. But it was all done, and the team did a fantastic job. So very grateful thanks to the team.
Thank you. I'd just like to add a word that I did have the joy of going to Loughborough to the sports and presenting some of the medals in my role as chairman, and I'm sure we'll see some of the athletes become Olympians, which was amazing, and what they did. Thank you. Mr. Old, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, an apology in terms of what the leader has got written in his statement. I had mistaken a police person for one of our social workers. So it isn't 2 of our employees who are getting the award, it is 3. And I wonder, please, if I might read the background to this and at the same time remind all of my colleagues in here of their personal responsibilities as an elected member in terms of children's safeguarding and well-being. Child A, now an adult, was subject to child sexual exploitation by a network of perpetrators for a 4-year period. He suffers from complex post-traumatic stress disorder and exhibits risky and impulsive behaviours, finding it almost impossible to disassociate himself from risky adults. But this is not uncommon due to his trauma experience. Angela Murphy is one of our social workers, responded to his needs and advocated for him and really helped him. She visited him on several occasions when he was in custody in an international prison. Child A would say that these visits kept him going whilst living in a frightening and unpredictable regime. Victor Cook, as the strategic lead for CSE from 2010, supported by Leicestershire Police, made representation to the West Midlands Police and safeguarding professionals about our concerns for Child A and other children in the Birmingham area. In May 2011, Donna Smalley, that is, and 2 Leicestershire police officers presented an intelligence file to the West Midlands Police that started the beginning of Operation Barzini, as it's been referred to. 25 suspects were identified and a number of vulnerable witnesses. Child A and another male were identified as significant witnesses. There were 12 defendants, only 2 on remand in prison, which meant that during the 10-week trial, the 10 suspects were in the local community and significant threats were made to Child A if he was going to give evidence. 10 professionals were identified to create a victim support package to keep Child A safe and sanitised during the trial. Child A gave evidence within the court via a video link over a 6-day period and was cross-examined by 10 barristers. On a daily basis, Donna Smalley led a debrief on the events in court, and the child sexual exploitation forensic psychologist provided an emotional profile of Child A so that we could support his emotional well-being during this difficult process. And as you've got in your notes, the conclusion of the trial resulted in the defendants receiving over 60 years in custodial sentences, one receiving a life sentence. Chairman, I think our workers deserve all the credit that there is going. This is a really tough experience for anybody to go into court to give evidence. To have the sort of personal outcomes that this young man has got following his abuse means he needed very careful and very skilled handling. And I'm really proud of Victor and Angela and Donna Smalley, and I would think that all members present would want to express their thanks to those workers as well. It is a reminder, and a really sharp reminder, of what, almost on a daily basis, our social care, children's social care staff are facing, sifting out allegation from reality, getting support in and getting evidence to court. And there is one person sitting in here who I'm now about to embarrass, Dr. Einan, who at the time came to me with a problem in the Colville area, and that was taken up, and that also resulted in a prosecution. So if any of you have got any doubts, you've picked up any hints, and you're not sure, please report it, because sometimes when you put 2 and 2 together, it actually comes to 4. And forewarned is forearmed. And the other councillor present, who I'm going to embarrass, is Simon Galton, who many, many years ago, with me, was part of an all-member working party looking at the future of special education in Leicestershire. And we had complete agreement across all politicians that we should build area special schools. So it really pleases me to have recorded in here that the final area special school has now been built. And Sean, if you want to go, because I haven't seen it either, we could go together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Auld. Mr. Bill, thank you.
Thought-provoking contribution this afternoon. Could I just return to the strategic growth plan, which was mentioned by Simon? I've been trying to follow this carefully over the last few months, and I am concerned about the way it's going, for many of the reasons that Simon has outlined. I realise that we're bound by the code of confidentiality and can't go into the details, so I want to be careful how I express this, but could we be given some indication as to why this all-important plan, or the production of this all-important plan, has now been delayed until later this year? We understood at one point that it was going to come to the various scrutiny bodies early on, but that's obviously now not going to happen. And could I also ask about the prospectus for growth that we issued with this morning, because of course this builds on the strategic growth plan and is now in the public domain, because this contains some controversial measures which I know will be of interest to people, but presumably we are allowed to talk about this aspect of it, but not the strategic growth plan aspect. And I'm just curious to know, what is the trail for the accountability of this particular document? Because what used to happen is that proposals such as this would have come to a committee, a subcommittee, a working party. It would go forward to a committee and would be finally approved and agreed by this body before distribution. But we now seem to be operating in a different way, where we're presented with a document. I'm not saying whether I agree with it or not, but we are presented with a document, and then asked to, presumably, well, just asked to take it or leave it. I'm puzzled now about the procedures in which we're now operating.
Thank you,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Bill. I'm taking no more speakers. We've just got Mr. Walsh, and then I'm closing the debate. Okay, Mr. Walsh, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to sort of follow Ivan's comments, and it seems right to do so in light of the leader's report. On Monday, I'm going down to Wigston Police Station to have a tour of our joint CSE endeavours with Leicester City, with the police, with a contribution also by Rutland. And I saw in the leader's report Donna and Victor mentioned. I don't know the third person, the social worker Ivan mentioned, but these two officers I know well through scrutiny and through the work of the child protection panels. What I wanted to say was we are blessed having such dedicated officers whose professionalism and passion on this subject, it couldn't be beaten. We are very, very fortunate, as are the children of Leicestershire, that we have officers such as these willing to go so far to protect these young people. So I wanted to endorse what Ivan had said, because we're very fortunate.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Rushton?
Chairman, thank you very much. First of all, can I say it wasn't a Freudian slip, it was a genuine mistake, and I had actually underlined it before I spoke and then for some reason missed it. So I am pleased to note the Scrutiny Commission has recently held a workshop on poverty following on from the Bishop of Leicester's Poverty Commission report, and I look forward to receiving its findings. So it wasn't a Freudian slip. I thank you and Simon and Scrutiny for their work and look forward to what comes out of it, because as we all know, it's going to be a challenging time. So thank you very much for reminding me, Terry. If I just say one thing to Terry first while I'm dealing with her. On the investing in property rather than keeping cash, as you know, Terry, if you've got money in the bank, like we've got group funds, and every time we have a group meeting, Bill Lickrish's group treasurer stands up and says we've earned threepence out of whatever hundreds we've got in there. The idea of investing in property is to get a minimum 7% return. And they are safe investments. We have advisors, and they are vetted by senior people like Byron and Richard, and they are to get a better return on our capital for the benefit of the people of Leicestershire. On the strategic growth plan, the strategic growth plan is not a county council document or initiative. The county, the 7 districts, the city and the LEP are equal partners and have equal ownership of the growth plan and have jointly funded the work presented this morning. But decisions on housing allocations are for districts as the local planning authorities. If districts, and obviously some of you are twin hatters, although we're not supposed to mention it, don't feel able to take the tough decisions, and you're rightly pointing out that they are very tough decisions with very large numbers, they need to consider how the government will react, since, as I said earlier on, housing is a very, very high priority. So all I say to districts, and it is their decision, I would try to agree something if they can, otherwise you'll get something imposed upon you. Personally, I'd have gone back to the old days where we had a county structure plan and we could all do it, but that's not where we are. We are where we are, and the districts need to agree. The MAG decision has been deferred until, Trevor is the chairman of it with another hat on, until early December, and they will make a decision at that meeting. On fairer funding, if you look at the whole pot of fairer funding, in my view, there may well be enough money if it was spread evenly. But as you say, what we have to do to make it work is to take money off London and Surrey. But if you look at London and Surrey, although now we're saying level up, not bring people down, or there'll be caps and collars, floors and ceilings and all that stuff, which will take for years, but it just does not seem fair. If you live in £1.5 million house in Islington, you pay £500. If you live in a regular house, say in Ashby-de-la-Zouch, you're paying £1,300. Now, it's not that Islington is super efficient or super clever, it's just that they're force-fed money. And that is what I told whoever it was at the LGA. She's not clever, she's just force-fed money. But if we're not going to get fair funding using the same money, the government will have to put some more money in and start bringing us up and not letting, and some slowly coming down, at least being frozen, because it is unfair on the people of Leicestershire that they pay £1,300 on a 200 grand house, and in Islington you've got a £1.5 million house and you pay £500. It just is not fair, no matter which way you look at it. On business rates, we had a very interesting presentation, myself and Byron, at the CCN AGM. If we retained all the business rates as a county council, that still does not close the gap. If we only retain 80%, it doesn't close the gap. There still have to be tariffs and things like that. So business rates isn't a solution, even if we could keep 80% of it. Something needs to be done based on the work that Byron's doing. And finally, can I thank Mr Welsh for his genuinely positive remarks, and congratulations to Ivan and to our staff, and I'd like to echo them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Rushton. We now go on to item 7. To consider reports of the Cabinet Scrutiny Commission and Scrutiny Committees and other bodies. Mr Galton? Sorry, Mr Rushton.
I move the recommendations on the Green Order paper, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah. Seconder, please.
Can I second the motion, Chairman?
Thank you very much, thank you. Mr Hunt, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the officers and all those involved for taking this report through so many stages, and congratulate them on reaching this final point in the programme. I have to say, though, the Labour Group remain concerned about the protection given to the county in exploiting oil and gas through fracking. Our concerns on this are well documented down the route through which the plan has travelled, and I don't propose to go into them now, but we will find ourselves abstaining on the report as the result.
Thank you, Mr Hunt. Mr Crooks, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Item on page 27, number 12. I've read the comments in PC8 on page 30 in the yellow pages. Is there any more information on which actual site this concerns, as there are several extractions of, and some of them are in Brasket and New Bolverden, which is part of my ward? Thank you.
Mr Rushton, do you want to respond?
Madam Chairman, on a technicality like that, obviously I'm unable to answer, although I will get a written reply to you. In my view, that was probably something that should have been raised at scrutiny or through scrutiny, where you could have the reply straight away. And I have nothing further to add to Max and the Labour Group's abstention.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any more questions? So, all in favour? All those against? Abstentions? Okay. Item B, Local Code of Corporate Governance. Never proposer?
Madam Chairman, may I move that the revised Code of Corporate Governance referred to in Section B of the report of the Cabinet be approved.
And a seconder, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On this subject of corporate governance, local government has changed a great deal since I became a member, and the way in which we operate is becoming more and more complex. The lack of finance in local government means we have to take some difficult decisions, and to serve the people of Leicestershire we now have to work with partners such as the Health Service, the police and other councils to make sure that we deliver good service and that we do it in the correct and proper manner. means we need to have a code of local governance. As officers and members, we should work to the rules in the code because it will provide much confidence to the people we serve. I formally second, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions? All in favour? Any against? Motion is moved. Thank you. Now come to item number 8, report of the Constitution Committee. Mr. Rushton.
Motion 1 that the proposed changes to the Constitution as set out in Appendix 1 to this report, other than those which relate to standing orders, the meeting procedure rules be approved. And motion 2, procedural motion in accordance with Standing Order 37, that the changes to standing orders, the meeting procedure rules as set out in Appendix 1 to the report of the Constitution be approved, and ask members to note that Standing Order 37 requires that this procedural motion, having been moved and seconded, stands adjourned until the next ordinary meeting of the Council.
Thank you. Mr. Galton. Thank you.
Chairman, yes, I'm happy to second that. We clearly do need to put into effect a proper procedure for dealing with petitions. Now we no longer have highway forums, and that report is sensible, and I understand it has to stand deferred till the next meeting.
Thank you. Any more? So, do we all agree in favour of the two motions? Please note that motion 2 will stand adjourned until the next council meeting. You all in agreement? Agreed. Any against? Thank you. Now come to item B, the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel on member remuneration on member allowances. Mr. Rushton, thank you.
Can I formally move that we accept the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel on members' allowances and go on to just say a couple of things on it. There was no input from our side to the Remuneration Panel at all, and we have agreed on our side that we will be having a free vote, so those who wish to abstain or maybe even vote against it can do. Having said that, in my view, you don't have an independent remuneration panel and then seek to pick it to pieces, whether it says members get a rise or members get a reduction. It's beholden on me as the leader of the County Council to move it as is. Because as I say, it's independent. It has to be done every 4 or 5 years, and this was done. I want to formally thank the members of the Independent Remuneration Panel who are remunerated, but a very paltry amount for the work they've done, and reinforce a couple of matters in their report, and it relates to members submitting an annual report. Now, I've been as bad, I suppose, as a lot of other members in the fact that I have forgotten to do it, but in future I will be instructing my group and my Chief Whip to ensure that members do submit their annual report at the end of the council year. To help members, there will be a template available. Well, so Richard, my Chief Whip, is certainly going to use a template for my members to do it. And I just ask you to make sure that you do it, because it was a key part of the remuneration panel's recommendations. I think when you
can we have one meeting, please?
When you're remunerating members, it is a very, very difficult circle to square. We cannot carry on with just old, white, retired men on this council. We have to remunerate people for the effort they put in, and also remunerate them for the money they lose. Now, I'm looking around here and I can't see any joiners, electricians or plumbers but that's who we should be encouraging here. So if they come here and have to give up time, and if they're self-employed, lose money, the remuneration should reflect the fact that they have given up time and money to come here, and they should not be disadvantaged by doing that. So I know it's a kind of difficult one to give ourselves a rise, but in my view, we haven't given ourselves a rise. The Independent Remuneration Panel has come up with recommendations about what the job of a county councillor entails. And personally, I think they've done a really good job and we should accept it, just the same as we should accept if they said we were having too much and weren't doing enough. And the next remuneration panel will meet. I think the Chief tells me we have to have it every cycle. So the next one will meet after the next election, and it'll be beholden on whoever is leader to move the recommendations of an independent remuneration panel. I move, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The seconder, please. Members, can we just have one meeting, please? And because it's difficult for the speakers to speak as it is, so I'm just asking you, please, to listen to the speaker. Thank you.
I second the motion and reserve my remarks.
Thank you. Mr. Charlesworth.
Thank you, Chair. I'll begin by the resources implications on page 79 under paragraph 4. Mentions a saving of £235,000 per annum. That's fine as part of the democratic process, but has got absolutely nothing to do with members' allowances. And while we've got rid of 2 Cabinet members, this has to be balanced against the new Conservative policy advisor to the Cabinet at a cost of £30,000 plus. How on earth did Highways Forums get included? Surely everything we as members do here is part of the democratic process, but that does not make it part of the members' allowance scheme, and the Highways Forums certainly weren't. The abolishment of the political assistance is a politically motivated move, and expecting the whips to pick up this line of work is short-sighted and damaging to the role of being a county councillor. The panel states in its report that members are accountable in multiple ways for monitoring the internal and external performance of the council. They have just made it much more difficult for opposition members to do that. The role of all members, including the ruling party, is to hold the executive to account. Doing an annual report is, I believe, a futile gesture that about 4 people will read. As for the savings of not being in the local government pension scheme, that decision was taken elsewhere. It appears that Christmas has come early for the Conservative group. The wish list that was sent to the panel has been delivered in full. In paragraph 33 of the report, the panel noticed a disparity with the SRA paid to opposition leaders. This was outside the scope of the review, and I'm doubtful whether they noticed it themselves or more likely it was brought to their attention. The panel then contradicted itself when looking at the methodology of determining the SRAs. They have treated all group whips equally with a proposal of £59 per member, but they haven't applied this rationale to the group leaders. If the leader of the council was to be paid £684 per group member, as are the other group leaders, his SRA would be £24,624. We could have saved £11,600 if the panel had been fair in its recommendations. It seems to me the controlling group has engineered a process that has enriched them at the expense of council taxpayers. With the cabinet posts, fire authority appointments, committee chairs and now deputy chairs, the leader has effectively greased the palms of nearly all 36 Tory members. Of course, the Conservative group didn't make any representation to the panel. They didn't need to. They knew what the outcome would be. The panel members, David Wilson, Jane Kelly and Michael Pearson, I believe have not come to these recommendations independently. I feel they've been guided through this process and done what was expected of them.
Excuse me. Can we have order?
Independent. Dictionary definition. Free from control in action and judgment. Autonomous. Not dependent on anything else for function. Not reliant on the support of others. That is the definition of independent. The report clearly shows that wasn't the case. Even allowing for the deletion of the 2 cabinet posts, the cost of the members' allowance scheme has increased. If you're happy to increase members' allowances, then by all means vote for these recommendations.
Can I ask Mr Charlesworth that you will apologise for making a personal comment, please? Right. Can we have that minuted then, please? Thank you. Dr Aynon, thank you. Sorry for the delay, Dr Aynon.
Thank you, Chair. The Labour group are generally supportive in principle of members' allowances, and for the very reasons that were mentioned by Councillor Rushton. There was a time when you could only represent your community if you had an independent income or a member of the landed gentry. Thank goodness things have changed. But without some form of remuneration, there are people who would not be able to sit in this chamber and represent their communities. And so it is important that there is a form of remuneration. We do have reservations about this report, which we wish to put on record. We're very pleased that the concept of index linking our remuneration to that of our staff has been accepted. And I think that will help to focus our minds as councillors on the needs of our staff as well. However, we are unhappy that, having taken the political kudos of freezing our own pay since 2009, we're now taking a cumulative percentage increase. And I think that there are members of our staff who will not understand this and will see this as us being not understanding their position of only getting 1% or even less over the last few years. I'm very pleased with the emphasis on annual reports. This is something that the Labour group are particularly keen on. I am disappointed that there is no teeth. What happens if you don't do one? You don't lose pay as you would in any business outside the council. I recognise that losing political assistance will, or should at least, increase the workload of councillors. We've done without one for nearly 4 years, which is lovely, because we've saved the council quite a lot of money as the Labour group. It also means you do your own research, you do your own homework, and you don't rely on someone else to think for you. And I think that is a vital part of being a councillor. I am disappointed that the additional posts, the savings, were used to create a post for the executive rather than this facility coming to strengthen scrutiny. Councillors do need to recognise that in this document it points out that the Consumer Price Index has increased by 18% since 2009, and our staff, of course, who work on the front line in social care, have had a cumulative percentage increase that leaves them struggling. However, as Councillor Rushton said, we agree in principle with independent pay review bodies. Not everyone benefits from having such a one, as we know from our own staff. And we do not believe that it is right to ignore the recommendations of independent pay review bodies. And the Labour group will be working with the recommendations, particularly on doing our own research and providing annual reports or more frequent reports to our electorate. And having made clear our concerns, which we hope will be documented, and our reservations, we do intend to vote for the motion.
Thank you very much, Dr Aynon. Are there any more comments? Mr Bentley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I support the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Matters. Since the elections in 2017, 55% or 20 of the Conservative group haven't claimed travel and substance expenses. This compares with just over half the members, 52% or 29 members overall, who have chosen not to claim these expenses. This is an option open to all members. I shall be voting for the recommendation of the independent panel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr Parton. Thank you.
I would like to... Okay, right. The leaders made a very critical point, and that what we're actually voting on today is not how much expenses we individually decide to claim, but rather whether we accept the report that an independent panel has decided upon. Now, the people who compose the panel are highly respected, highly professional, and highly skilled men and women. And I can imagine that should any one of us had contacted a member of this panel to discuss expenses, we would have been immediately reported for misconduct. In terms of one's personal expenses, it actually is not a personal matter, because every 4 years one has to have one's name on a ballot paper. The public decide whether you have been worth the expenses that you claimed. But I think above all, one's conscience should be guided by this. At the end of every single day, did I do the very best I could today for every resident in my care?
Thank you, Mr. Parton. Mr. Old, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I accept everything that my leader has said about the panel, but for my own personal reasons, as I did once in the past, I will not be accepting any increase in my allowances, and I'd like that to be logged, please.
Thank you very much. And so now we'll take it to the vote. Mr. Rushton, sorry, first.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't see...
Dr. Felton.
Yeah, Dr. Felton, sorry.
Sorry about that, yeah, I know.
Oh, I've missed you.
I know, I hide behind people. I mean, much has been said. I have to say, in no way could I ever put my words to anything that the whip for the Liberal Democrats said. Absolutely appalling behaviour. And what he said about the independent panel, I think, is absolutely dreadful, and he should have apologised. However, that's down to him now, clearly. I would stress the point. This is an independent remuneration panel. It's been made by others, and as such, I feel that their advice is what we must follow. Dr. Ryan has mentioned the fact that the actual increase, which hasn't obviously occurred for us members...
Can we, while Mr. Felton's trying to speak, can we just have a little bit of hush, please?
I will speak louder if you can't hear. 2009 is the last time that this was reviewed to this extent. And so what they're advising is increase in line with a cumulative local government employee pay award. No more, no less. So the 500 and whatever it works out at, £39. Mr. Rushton has made the point, and I totally agree, we've got to understand now that we can't rely on people who have private incomes. Perhaps the Liberals can. Maybe that's why they make their points. But certainly, clearly, the Labour group and our Conservative group, we have members who either have to give up jobs in order to be councillors or obviously take their work part-time. And therefore, they should be remunerated to a level. And the level has been advised by the remuneration panel, and I feel, therefore, we must accept their advice. Whether individually we take that rise is entirely up to us, and Mr. Old has already made an example of that. But I think at this point, I certainly will be voting for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Felton. We'll now take it to the vote. Oh, sorry, Mr. Rushton. Sorry, I'm trying to rush you all.
No problem. Can I, first of all, thank Ted Parton for his excellent contribution. He pointed out a lot of items I wished I'd pointed out in my opening address, so thanks very much, Ted. It was really, really good. Can I speak to Terry in particular, and thank you for your support. And I would have liked some teeth to the recommendations that we have to submit an annual report. But it is an independent panel. And I'm not going to, as I said earlier, I'm not going to question little bits of it. We either adopt it, and if we call it in, we accept it. So I thank you for your generally positive report, and I will certainly be insisting on my group that they submit an annual report, as I know you do. Now, when we come to Mr. Charlesworth, I did intend to answer some of his questions, but I have absolutely no intention of replying to such an appalling speech in my life. To say it was engineered is slanderous. To say we greased palms is slanderous. To question in public and not apologise independent people who have served to deliver this report is absolutely appalling. And Simon, I know he's your deputy, but if I was you, I'd sack him.
Thank you. Now we'll go to the vote. So all those in favour, show your hands. Thank you. All those against? Abstentions? I shall be abstaining as well. Thank you. We now come to item 9, notices of the motions. To consider the following motions, Dr. Inan, do you want to move it? Thank you.
No. Thank you, Chair. Unite, Unison and the GMB, who represent many of our own local government employees, have submitted a pay claim that attempts to narrow the growing gap between declining wages and the rising cost of living. The Consumer Retail Price Index, as we have recently heard in the previous debate, since 2009 has gone up 18%. However, the cumulative pay of our staff has only gone up by 5.3%. And our own local unions here have asked the Labour group to stand up for them and with them. And that is why we have brought forward this motion on the National Joint Council pay. And we hope that councillors will discuss this and support it. It is worth noting that not all public sector staff benefit from independent pay review bodies. And in fact, a recent government review showed that the pay of those groups in the public sector who lack a pay review body tend to fall behind. And that includes some of our staff, some of our most low-paid frontline staff. The TUC have previously called for this to be remedied. We've, as councillors, have just voted on the outcome of our own independent pay review, and that is a luxury that some of our staff do not have. And therefore, as the Labour group, we believe it would be very poor for staff morale here in this institution if, as councillors, we failed to note the NJC pay claim, if we failed to recognise the sacrifices made by our own staff. And I do therefore urge all members to support this motion and to resolve to work with the Local Government Association and to lobby the government, and crucially to meet with the unions to show them that we are not just here to protect our own remuneration or to protect even the budget of the council, but that we do care that there are people on our staff who find it difficult to afford to work for us, who are choosing to work for agencies, which is not good for us, because they are getting lower and lower pay. So I think it behoves on us, having taken the vote that we just have, to vote to support our staff in their representations and their attempts to get a decent level of pay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr Snowden, thank you.
Second the motion. Local services across Leicestershire are reliant upon the hard work, dedication and commitment of our public service workers across this county. This is nothing new, of course, or indeed unique to Leicestershire, but it is worth reminding ourselves exactly how our services are delivered, not by us in this chamber, not by our senior officers, but by frontline staff. Without them, there would be no child protection services, no street lighting, no social care services, or any other function provided by this authority. The pay cap, in conjunction with the consistent withdrawal of funding from services from central government, has now put those very services at risk. Our staff face the very realistic prospect of having to use charity and the decent nature of others mainly to feed their families. We could use the nurses using food banks as an example of public sector workers not managing. So the richest in our society indeed have become even more distant and their lives further away from theirs. All of that to some extent ought to leave a bad taste in all of our mouths. Our staff have faced nearly a decade of pay freezes and underinflation rises. Yet in large, they have stayed, they have been loyal and consistent to deliver services to our communities. It would be morally reprehensible if this chamber was not to support those staff now when they're very much in their hour of need. Not only do we owe our staff for the work they do as their employer, but we also owe it to the representatives of our communities. Do we not wish all to have good, well-paid jobs? Because there are residents too. This council should lead by example to other employers across our great county and demonstrate the value of recognising the importance of every workforce in every building across Leicestershire. However, I do acknowledge that in these times it's very difficult for the council. We've been subject to years of cuts from central government, and that has really left us, as Baron mentioned earlier, struggling for funding. And we all know the real challenge that faces all local authorities in these times. That is why we are calling upon this council to lobby hard for the funding to come from government. The money is there to end this trend of impoverishing the workforce, and the political will should be there as well. I just hope this chamber responds in a decent, just, and above all a moral manner in dealing with this issue. So I would commend that we actually not limit our staff to the 1% increase at a time when, as Terry mentioned earlier, the cost of living index is now 18%. I'm sure everyone here would finds this iniquitous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs Newton. If there are no more speakers, then we go on to the amendment to be moved by...
Sorry, just to ask Mr Richardson, does he want to speak on this or on the amendment?
Mr Richardson, do you want to speak on the amendment? Yeah.
Do you want to speak on this or on the amendment?
Sorry.
Does he want to speak on the motion?
Do you want to speak on the motion or the amendment?
This one.
The motion.
I think he'd be better on the amendment. I think ask Mr Rhodes to do the amendment.
Do you think it'd be best if you spoke on the amendment?
Yeah.
Thank you, yes.
Mr Richardson, speak now.
Well, there's lots of debate. I thought I was speaking at the right time, but perhaps I'm wrong, and you can tell me if I'm not. I listened very carefully to what was said, and I've read the motion very carefully. What concerns me is that we should be caring about all of our residents, not just those that work in the public sector, but those that work in the private sector. We do need to remember that it is the wealth created by the private sector that pays for the public sector. And wages in the public sector are still higher than those in the private sector. So, as of the figures released in April of this year, the average weekly pay in the public sector is £506 a week, and in the private sector it is £464 a week. Now, I appreciate the gap has closed, but equally that does not take into consideration the pension aspect of people's salary. Now, we all remember that back in Gordon Brown's second budget, he effectively destroyed private sector pensions by his tax changes, which meant final salary schemes were phased out for most private sector workers, whether they remain in place for public sector workers. Now, I don't wish to pit one against the other. What I'm looking for is fairness. And quite often in these debates, we miss the people that create the wealth of this country. Most people in private sectors do not have spine points. Most people in public sectors do not get those spine points on a yearly basis. So in local government, most staff have had, certainly in excess of 50% of staff have had in excess of 5% each year. Dr. Einer mentions the CPI index. Well, the CPI index is a very interesting thing. I doubt if there's many people in this room who can actually tell us what's in it. But in the latest editions, they've included different types of gin and bicycle helmets, just to name but two. So the CPI doesn't actually relate to basic needs of people. It relates to a stream of things which, in fact, no one in their right mind would consider as essential. So I would just like to say that what we need to consider when we're considering in which way we vote is that we need to think of all of the residents we represent, and I would find it very difficult to single out one group against another.
If there are no more speakers on the motion, call Mr Rhodes to the amendment.
If there are no more speakers, then we move on to the amendment. Will be moved by Mr Rhodes. And thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Every time I come to this council, I learn something. Different kinds of gin in the CPI calculation. Quite right too. I do move the amendment because we in this group, the Conservative group, actually have great sympathy with the main motion, which has been so ably moved by Dr. Rynan. However, we are very conscious of the fact that this is a national negotiation, and the unions, of course, have put in for 5% increase, which would cost the council 7.5%. 7.5 million, I beg your pardon, in total if it was fully met. And being a national organisation, it does mean that we shouldn't undermine the work of the national negotiations which are carried out, which, of course, if we were to start making our own independent representations, would be the case. So our amendment actually takes the main theme of the motion, which has been moved, but deletes section B, which is all the issues about making those separate representations. I believe that actually in itself is more realistic, shows great sympathy with the view, because our view is actually that our employees should be paid well. They've, after all, received only 1% a year for the last 5 years. Before that was a pay freeze. But if we're to go over that 1%, which is what we put into our future budgets, then we'll be in great difficulty in funding it, and it would have an impact possibly on employment, but certainly on the services that we offer to the public if we were to have to try to fund anything beyond that ourselves. So I move the amendment in my name, and Mr. Shepherd will second it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. And seconder, Mr. Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I second the amendment. It has the virtue, in my view, of expressing with great clarity in 3 clear statements the essential argument, particularly in expressing our need to find fairness both for those who work for the council and for all those who live in the county. I am pleased to second the amendment, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Sheenan, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, looking at the wording of this amendment, whilst we wouldn't oppose it, it is rather half-hearted, and it reminds us that it's the Conservative government that has created this situation. So it does seem that the Tory group are lagging behind the Labour group in their commitment to sorting this out. And frankly, I think in this situation, in this instance, we are showing leadership of the council on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheenan. Mr. Galton, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I thought that the Labour motion was quite reasonable, really. It recognised the situation that we've had for the last 7 years. And I think the difference is it actually wanted the council to resolve to do something. So to call on the LGA to make further representations, to write to the Prime Minister and to sit down with the unions and have a discussion. What's happened now under this amendment, all that's been filleted out. And I'm not really sure why that is. What is the problem with taking any action? When it says it now, we call on the government, but what can the mover of the amendment clarify what that means? Or are we going to do anything or write to anything? I can see the leader looking at the policy advisor for some advice on this, but there's a serious point. The previous one wanted to resolve with the council to take some action, and we seem to be watering this down. We'll vote for this because I think it's important the council makes a statement, and 2, does actually note the sacrifice made by public sector workers, and I think we all would want to do that for the reasons that Terry Eynon set out, with some of the, and I think also the seconder, Betty as well, that what the public sector workers have gone through in the last 7 years, and some, Ivan spoke earlier about the workers in the Children's Services Department, the things that they have to deal with in everyday life as part of their job. We need to support them in that, but I think this could have gone a bit further.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Dr. Onion, do you want to say anything else on the issue before it goes to the amendment?
Thank you, Chair. I think my colleagues have pointed out what are the fundamental differences between the original motion and this amendment, which, as Councillor Galton has pointed out, has filleted out all the actions and left us looking rather weak. And it asks us to fully fund any agreed pay rise for the NJC. So that could be as low as 0.5%. And that's all we're asking for, is for them to fund any. And I think that given what that we are filleting out any sense that we would even talk to our unions or even make representation to the LGA, I do feel that's very sad. So I hope that people will vote against this amendment and have the courage to show our staff by doing so that they are likely to support the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Onion. I can now put the amendment to the vote. So all in favour? All those against? Thank you. All now in favour of the substantial motion? Yeah. Any against? The motion's carried, isn't it? Yeah, the motion's carried. Is that the end of that? That's the end of that. Thank goodness for that. Yeah. What number's this on the agenda? We now come to the next motion, which is the electrification of the Midland Main Line. Mr Mullaney, would you like to speak, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm pleased to present this motion to the Council. Electrification of the Midland Main Line is a vital infrastructure project for Leicester, Leicestershire and the whole of the East Midlands. I'm pleased I think we have cross-party support for this cause and that we're able to work together and move forward with a united front on this issue. Whilst the rest of the world is investing in and enjoying the benefits of 21st century technology, Britain's railways seem to be stuck in the 20th century with polluting diesel engines. The electrification of the East Midlands Main Line is a campaign which many people have campaigned on for a very long time. I know my colleague David Bill has been campaigning on it since about the 1980s, and it was something that I put a motion to the East Midlands Lib Dem Conference in early 2010, which got passed, calling for the electrification of the East Midlands Main Line, and I'm glad that during the coalition government a lot of progress was made towards a commitment to providing the new, faster, cleaner electric train service that we need in this area. Unfortunately, shortly after the coalition government ended in 2015, the new government announced a pause to the project, and there was concerns that the project would be in danger. For a short while, there was some hope that the plans might eventually get back on track, but unfortunately these hopes have now been dashed by a recent announcement from the Secretary of State for Transport to scrap electrification of the Midland Main Line beyond Kettering. Now, we as a council must work together with colleagues across the East Midlands to persuade the government that neglecting investment here in our region would be a huge mistake. Electrification of the Midland Main Line is an important project for a good number of reasons, particularly environmental. Electric trains do not give off the carbon emissions and do not pollute our air with the dangerous PM2.5 particles that are emitted from diesel engines. These particles are particularly associated with numerous health risks, especially around heart and respiratory problems. It would also be a huge boost to speed and capacity. Journeys from Leicester to London could potentially be reduced to under an hour. And as well as improvement in the quality of life for Leicestershire residents travelling by rail, there are also significant economic benefits for our regions, which there is potential from with this project, which was why it was a major part of the Midlands Engine programme. As better transport connectivity of our region with London and the north would benefit us all. Leicestershire will not benefit directly from HS2, which will largely pass through the northwest of our county. Electrification of the Midland Main Line was the project that would improve travel and connectivity here in Leicester and Leicestershire. Unless a HS2 passenger is headed to and from one of the few destinations on its routes, they'll be relying on the existing train network for at least part of their journey. The HS2 doesn't operate in isolation. It will operate as part of a wider train network, which all needs investment if it's to meet the needs of our country and its modern economy. The government solution so far seems to have been written for an episode of Yes Minster to produce a new type of train which will have both an electrical engine and a diesel engine, making them less efficient. These biomode trains would run on electricity up to Kettering, then run on diesel through the East Midlands. As a result, we here in Leicestershire would see few of the benefits. In particular, we continue to suffer from the air pollution that comes from a diesel engine. If the government was to invest a large sum of money in these inferior trains, it would be a good number of years before they'd be ready to invest again. I believe it's important that we don't allow the government to invest millions of pounds in half-hearted measures for our regions, which would leave Leicestershire and the East Midlands with an inferior rail service for a generation. One of the most frustrating things about this announcement is that in the same week we hear of the cancellation of the electrification of the East Midlands. The government announces a £30 billion announcement for Crossrail 2 in London. Again, we see money is found for investment in London, whilst the East Midlands and many other parts of the country are neglected. One of the main messages that appeared to come out of the Brexit vote was that areas outside of London are sick of being left behind and forgotten about, and if the government wants to try to address that problem, then it's time for it to recognise that there's a world beyond the M25 and we need to have government investment in East Midlands projects as well, because if we're to succeed as a country, we need investment across the country, not just limited to the capital. We've seen from the example of the Northern Irish DUP how MPs can extract support for infrastructure projects in their areas in return for maintaining this government in office. Leicestershire voters have loyally returned Conservative MPs to Parliament for many years. Now is the time for these MPs to ensure that the government does not take this support for granted and instead puts pressure on the government to give the investment that Leicestershire and the rest of East Midlands deserves for its railways. I ask members in the Chamber to support this motion and to set out a clear position for this Council, for us to work with colleagues across the East Midlands to campaign for the continuation of the electrification of the East Midlands main line to improve rail services in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mullaney. Seconder, Mr Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I similarly welcome the fact that this appears to have all party support. I've been involved with this issue throughout my time here at County Hall, and I've been going through my records and will make them available to anybody who's interested in taking this forward. The first I've got a number of reports I want to refer to, which I cannot go into in detail, of course, because time will not permit. But the first, I will do if you give me extended time. But the first report is labelled "The Midland Main Line: The Way Ahead," which set out all the arguments in 1984, and that was the end of the a long consultative process which involved the cooperation of all the local authorities in the East Midlands, and in fact was then the forerunner to the Regional Planning Authority and the Regional Assembly, so it was quite an important historical document in itself. I'll just roll forward very quickly the next 30 years, and we'll come to Network Rail's own report, which was issued last year, and that sets out the arguments with which we are all familiar: the connectivity, capacity, line improvements, journey times, passenger comfort, and so on. That was put out in order to persuade the good people of Harborough that they actually, and South, that they actually wanted to put up with the removal of the bridges, the uplifting of the bridges. But that was actually put out by the government itself as well, so that was quite an important document. Then earlier this year, when it was quite clear that the scheme was in trouble, the East Midlands Councils produced a 4-page document which sets out the arguments in great depth, really. And it talks about the benefits and the fact, but then it starts to stress the upgrading work, because it's not just electrification; it's the improvement of the whole system. So then we come to earlier this year, and as late as March this year, Sir John Peace and his group put together the Midlands Connect document, which we keep on referring to because this is a really important document which is going to have massive implications for ourselves and the rest of the Midlands, in fact, and that stresses the need for connectivity. In other words, it's stressing as indeed the earlier documents do, the need for electrification take place in order to make the best use of HS2. No good us having a second-class haul system if the rest of the country is going to be hauled through HS2. It's obvious, and page after page of this document stresses that point. In fact, it was picked up this morning in the strategic growth plan, which we looked at, which emphasised the same point. And finally, I've been back in the last 24 hours to the authors of these three reports: the Network Rail report, the East Midlands Council's report, and the Midlands Connect report, and they all say that the upgrading will continue simply because the Department of Transport, in their franchise document, which is the last document which I referred to, it actually says that the upgrading will go ahead. Now, I think this has to be the point that we stress with our negotiations, if we get into them, with the MPs and with the Department for Transport, because it is not just the wiring and the electrification that has to go ahead, it's the full modernisation programme, and they are inviting people to apply for the franchise, and that is down as one of the background documents. So I would urge you to look at that and make sure that that is part of the final submission that we put to government.
Thank you very much,
Madam Chairman.
Mr. Hunt, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Like the earlier speakers, it's absolutely vital that this local authority continues to put pressure on the government to bring in electrification of the line. The plan the government's put forward for half and half up and down from Kettering, you could say it runs the coach and horses through our rail strategy. A rail strategy we only agreed a year ago. Overwhelmingly, the rest of the world's railways now run electric. The arguments for electrification have been outlined by my colleagues. It's cleaner, it's greener, uses electricity which can be sourced from a variety of ways, which frees from the variations of price and supply. Trains running trackside electricity are lighter than those that have to carry their own fuel supply and therefore much more energy efficient. In contrast, the famous biomode trains, they do have a useful niche to play, and there is a problem currently on the Midland Main Line because our old HSTs, the high-speed trains, are now are destined to be replaced soon because they don't comply with various safety and disability demands. So one can accept a temporary solution, although it is one which is hideously expensive because they run underpowered diesel and as well as carrying electric motors. So, can we reasonably call on electrification now? In view of the problems of delays on the Great Western Line, probably not, but we have to keep up the pressure. There's a difference between saying, sorry, you'll have to wait a little bit longer, which is something that we might accept, but to say it's not worth doing is unacceptable. We must keep talking about this so that there's high public consciousness of the issue, which will put pressure on the government and give encouragement to the industry to create even better electric systems.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Mr. Payne, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And although it's rare in this chamber, it's a pleasure to be a part of coming together and putting on a united front for a common cause that we all care about. This motion, if passed by this council, will send a clear message to government that we in Leicestershire believe the business case for full Midlands Main Line electrifications remains strong, and I urge our MPs to lobby the Secretary of State to this effect. We were promised full Midlands Main Line electrification under David Cameron, and the £490 million plan is cheap by comparison to the £30 billion Crossrail 2 project or the Thames Link in London. And whilst talking about promises, I have to say this whole journey is panning out much like that popular rhyme talking about the fate of King Henry VIII's 6 wives, where we had promised Paul's died. Maybe we'll get promised Paul's survived, who knows. Work has even commenced on track and on the infrastructure and line improvements, such as the line straightening at Market Harbour. So the only issue I'd take with the actual motion, although it certainly wouldn't persuade me to vote against it, is it states indeed that the Market Harbour works have already been completed. That just simply isn't the case. They've only just begun, and there's a car park a new car park being built there to accommodate the new straightening of the line. Midlands Main Line is vital to our local and regional economy. It is not at all clear that bi-mode trains could deliver the same level of performance as High-Speed 2 classic compatible trains, or make the most of the line speed improvements now being implemented on the Midland Main Line. This could result in a loss of up to £40 million per annum to our local economy. We have a strong track record of collaborative working in the East Midlands. Here in Leicestershire, particularly through the Leader, we play a leading role in driving the Midlands economy through the Midlands Engine for growth and via the Midlands Connect. They have been instrumental in agreeing a strong business case for a classic compatible link at the hub station, which I'm told has been well received by the Department of Transport, and I'm hopeful that such a link can be provided for via the hybrid bill process. So it seems that all can benefit through a change of heart by the government. We deserve better than cattle class service on clunky trains, or worse, London Underground's cast-me-downs, or so-called cascade trains. So as lead member for the Transportation Strategic Transportation in the Highways Department, I can assure you that officers will remain in contact with civil servants at the Department of Transport, trying to seek clarification and answers to the issues that we're all raising. But for now, let's all send a united message to our MPs and the government by passing this motion today. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mrs Radford, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I fully support this motion, and when my late husband was alive, we travelled many miles by train, and I am aware of how much cleaner electric trains are in other parts of the world. I was therefore very disappointed to learn that the electrification of the Midland Main Line was cancelled.
Yeah, we got Mr. Parr.
Thank you very much. I have got other speakers down, but I'm taking no more speakers because there will have been 9 speakers on this issue. So, Mr. Osborne next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Whilst I would vote for the motion, there are 1 or 2 items, perhaps of detail, that I would highlight, and I'm not necessarily in agreement. If I went to C, where it says, notes that the business case electrification remains strong, no argument, and is essential for HS2 integration and the delivery of classic compatible services. What is essential for Leicester and Leicestershire is not, in this case, whether it's electrification that delivers the classic compatibility, but whether we have classic compatibility itself. That can be delivered by bi-mode trains as well as electrification. So I wouldn't actually just link electrification with classic compatibility. I would say any train system that you're going to use has to have that classic compatibility. Or else, as in the words of the Leader, Leicestershire will have all the pain and no gain. It serves us nothing if we don't get that classic compatibility at the next stop. The second part on E, and it, Main Speaker has said about the polluting particles, I find it fairly ironic that in the week that we're told that electrification is not going to happen, we're going to have diesel electric, that a week later the government comes out and says that they want to stop production by 2040 of diesel cars. It just seems odd. Odd in timing. On F, and it's F really that I have some qualms, because yes, it is in the interests of Leicester and Leicestershire, but electrification is not going to happen. And I'll tell you why I believe it won't happen. With the previous Secretary of Transport Minister, he had promised that electrification would get post-2023. And because it was post-2023, I had, and the department had, pressed the minister to say, look, if that's going to happen, we've got to have bi-mode trains. You have to have bi-mode trains because by 2020, the current trains and rolling stock has to be withdrawn. It's non-compliant with legislation anyway. It was built in 1976. They are out of date and really of no use. You cannot afford to have a time schedule whereby you have got nothing between 2020 and 2023 or thereabouts. And I think the realistic approach is to say electrification just isn't going to happen. And especially if the government is pointing and saying, but we want to spend more money on Crossrail 2 than we do up on the other schemes which we had promised. What I would have rather have seen, because it is essential to the growth plans that Leicester and Leicestershire have that we heard about this morning, connectivity, is to have, if we're going to have the bi-mode trains, and if you're going to authorise the Chief Executive to write to all Leicestershire MPs and seek their support, I have no problem with that. But what I would ask is that you ask them to say to the Minister, if we're going to have bi-mode trains, when? We need to know the date, because it cannot be after 2020, or else you are going to have a fairly severe diminution in service. The second thing is that I would actually like MPs or us as a council to be able to write to Hitachi, who are the makers of bi-modes and the rolling stock, and say to them, when is our order in your production schedule, and when in that schedule are we due to have delivery? I would have far more comfort in that promise and that knowledge than I will do yet another minister promising something that, in my opinion, is never going to get delivered. With those qualifications on the motion, I do support the motion. I would like just to add slightly more certainty so that people who are going to invest in Leicester and Leicestershire can do so with the knowledge that the growth plans we have got, we actually mean, and we can back up with suitable connectivity.
Mr Osborne, can you just bring your comments? Thank you.
I know my time's up.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr Rushton, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously, Peter is exactly right. Classic compatibility is important. I don't think we can amend the motion or add anything to it, but obviously minutes are being taken and Peter's points can be reflected when we write in, hopefully. I just want to say a couple of things. Mr Mullany, this is a joint motion, as you know. We saw your first, we batted it backwards and forwards. We offered to second it, but David wanted to second it. Max Hunt wanted to second it. So please remember it's a joint motion that still does have our support, despite, in parts of your speech, you were getting a little bit critical of us. So we don't want to lose the motion for your exuberance to stand again in Hinckley. Can I just point out, and Blake did mention it in passing, but it is worth repeating, because I have had it from Andrew Pritchard at East Midlands Councils, and it is approved by the DFT, that despite the cancellation of electric, I know through Midland Connect we have developed a strong business case for a classic compatible link at the hub station, which I understand has been well received. As a result, I'm hopeful that we can ensure provision for such a link through the hybrid build process. So even if we don't get electrification, I'm still very much in favour of electrification. The classic compatibility, as mentioned by Peter, and the rail strategy and connectivity mentioned by many people here is of paramount importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rushton. Mr Kaufman, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be supporting this motion this afternoon. My concern is how people lose faith in politicians. Things are promised, things are worked out, we go through the system, and then somebody comes along, it's not going to happen. I would be much happier if the government had said, times are hard, we've got Brexit, we've got all these things on our hands, we've got to postpone it just a little bit longer. The thing that worries me is the improvements that are supposedly happening as part of this electrification, and I would really like confirmation that they're going to happen. And to me, the main one is the underpass that was promised to go from east to west to link up, I suppose, Birmingham with Peterborough. And the only station we have in the borough of Oby and Wixton is South Wixton, which by train into Leicester is 4 minutes, but it's a 2-hourly service most of the day. So what I would like assurance is the east-west link underpass going to happen as part of this process? Because it would enable us. What made me worry, and the reason I got up today, was a meeting I attended this morning, and we were talking about, the officers were talking about improving the link between Leicester and Coventry and Leicester and Birmingham. But nobody mentioned anything about going further east than Leicester. And I just would like assurances that regardless of what happens, if we have to put up with this for a little longer, the improvements that were promised in Leicester to get east-west transport going will actually happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kaufman. Mr Parton, thank you.
My late father was a lifelong railway expert. He was not a train spotter. He was a former operations and special projects manager at the Great Central Railway. So I was brought up all my life to appreciate the minutiae of railway management. So I did some investigations, and when Rail magazine contacted the Department of Transport in 2016 regarding concerns that electrification of a line in Yorkshire was under threat, a spokesman commented, "We do not comment on speculation. Passengers expect high-quality rail services, and we are committed to electrification where it benefits passengers." And the press release continued, "Bi-mode trains will be able to deliver all the benefits of new trains to passengers more quickly, without the disruption of electrification work." Now, Rail magazine's editor commented that he thought that perhaps one reason for the cancellation for the Midland Main Line could be significant cost overruns on Network Rail's Great Western Railway modernisation, which resulted in several gaps in the overhead rail line equipment. And the Public Accounts Committee felt the same, who had scrutinised the GWR project and found that serious design failings were present, planning and costing the project was very badly done, and that the overspend in 1 year alone on GWR electrification was £1.2 billion. Now, there are some in the railway industry that state bi-mode trains are more complex, which is obvious, expensive to build, again obvious, and so far in testing have proved more sluggish on diesel power than the trains that they would replace, which is the HST and the Class 222, which is unique to Midland Main Line. So there are 4 actions to finish. Could we ask our Chief Executive and our MPs to contact Hitachi for technical data? Can the trains be delivered to be as fast as our current 222 and in-city 125s? Second, what lessons have the Department of Transport learned, and what actions will they put into practice so that future and our future project will be made on time and on budget? Thirdly, what will our MPs do to petition and persuade the Department of Transport to complete the electrification of the Midland Main Line? And I would urge us to do the same. And also, for more information, to contact the editors of Rail, Railway and Modern Railways magazines who are experts in this field to stay informed of progress in this issue. And to finish, I thought it was very appropriate reading the notes. On page 42 we have a CITFA matrix and it's entitled Achieving the Intended Outcomes while Acting in the Public Interest at All Times. So let's ensure that the Department of Transport do the same, which of course our point X is electrification of our Midland Main Line.
Thank you very much, Mr Parton. So our last speaker now, I call on Mr Poland. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I won't take up much of members' time. A lot of what I wanted to say has been said already. Really what I wanted to talk about today is the importance of classic connectivity with HS2. Now, I also am not a particular rail enthusiast. A good friend of mine, though, is a signalman on the railways. And he tells me a few things. First of all, the system and network we have today would be largely familiar to a signalman from 1890. Second of all, the systems he uses to control trains would likewise be similar to that Victorian. So the reality is our network is in need of, frankly, bringing into the 21st century. So for that reason, I've been a supporter of HS2. But then how does that affect us here in Leicestershire? Now, as has been talked about, it skirts through northwest Leicestershire, but obviously the hub, I believe, is in Towton and won't be here. So for us to get the benefit, okay, at the moment it's slightly over an hour to get from Leicester to London if you get the fast train, okay, which isn't bad. We can improve on it. It isn't bad. But for me, one of the big opportunities of HS2 is northwards. Okay, HS2 is likely to open up the economies of the north, what George Osborne called the Northern Corridor, the Northern Powerhouse. And if that's the opportunity of the future, then that's something I want our businesses here in Leicestershire, or our people here in Leicestershire, to be able to get on board with, if you'll excuse the pun. So whilst it would be nice to shave an extra 10 minutes off the trip to London, really what I'm looking for is how we can improve our network northwards. And that means classic connectivity with HS2. So that really I'd just like to echo the points made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Poland. Mr Mullaney, would you like to close the debate on the motion, please?
Say thank you to all the members who spoke in the debate, and as there's a rare example of near consensus in the chamber, let's move to the vote.
Thank you very much, Mr Mullaney. So we put it to the vote. All in favour? I don't think there's any against, but I'll say any against. Motion carried. Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, could I just
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr Rushton. There will be tea and biscuits. Thank you very much.